Thank you for your patience. Now we will begin session Security Through Climate Change Adaptation and Resilience. First of all, I would like to introduce our moderators and speakers. For our moderators, we have Professor Arima Jun, Senior Counselor, Japan Organization for Metals and Energy Security, Visiting Professor, Graduate School of Public Policy, the University of Tokyo, Professor, Kaishi Professional University, Japan. Dr. Ismail Saragiln, ICEF Steering Committee, Co-Chair of the Board of Nizami Ginjavi International Center, Emeritus Librarian of Alexandria, former VP of the World Bank, Egypt. Mr. Vali Musa, ICEF Steering Committee, Deputy Chairperson of the Presidential Climate Change Commission, former President, International Union of Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, South Africa. And for our speakers, we have Dr. Hoesung Lee, ICEF Steering Committee, former Chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, President, Carbon Free Alliance, Korea. And Mr. KUMAHIRA Tomonobu, Co-Founder and CEO, Mizu, Water One, United States of America, Japan. And Dr. Faten Attig-Bahar, Deputy Director of the Future Earth Africa Hub, University of Pretoria, Visiting Research Fellow, Rhodes University, Tunisia. And I would like to ask main moderator, Professor Arima, to moderate this session. So Mr. Arima, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us at this very much important session on security through climate change adaptation and resilience. As you know, the impacts of climate change are intensifying around the world, and adaptation has become a critical issue, and especially for vulnerable countries and regions. Today, we will focus on the challenges and opportunities for adaptation technologies and the prospects for their dissemination, particularly in the global south or Africa, and the urgent need for bridging financial gap. Our session will begin with keynote presentation from Dr. Lee, followed by remarks from Mr. KUMAHIRA and Dr. Bahar. And we will then move on to panel discussion and finally open the floor for questions from both our on-site and online audience. I encourage everyone to actively participate in this session and look forward to fruitful and engaging discussion. Let us begin. And first of all, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Hoesung Lee, ICEF Steering Committee member and former chair of the IPCC and president of the Carbon Free Alliance. Dr. Lee, floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm very happy to be in this session, especially because the adaptation session was really the first time that the ICEF took up as a dedicated session. And I have prepared a couple of slides for my keynote. I just hear the definition of adaptation. The reason I want to show this definition, particular definition, is the IPCC definition. It indicates that the adaptation is a process of adjustments, and particularly to the climate change. And that this adjustment process, we people always adjust to something that changes around ourselves. So why we are very particular about adjusting ourselves or systems to changes in climate. And that difference, the changes in climate is the key point that we want to highlight, this adaptation, away from adaptation from the adaptive activities, from the usual the process of adjustment we humans take. This is what happens when proper adaptation has not been made, and this is one of the episodes occurred in Ireland. Ireland is very strong in wind power, and somehow it is broken due to the last storm. But you notice that there are other wind tower still intact. So, you can ascribe this as a failure of adaptation, or you can say this is a success of adaptation. The adaptation is not to guarantee 100% safe from the climate damage. Now, I want to indicate from this last slide that the adaptation is particularly a local activity. And if it is local, then why the world is concerned about adaptation, and particularly why the Global Climate Treaty has a place for adaptation. I want to say something about that in the first place. And in my understanding, there are two reasons for such inclusion of adaptation in the global treaty. The first is, I want to emphasize this, the developed countries recognize that it was their responsibilities to help others in developing countries for adaptation. And secondly, the world also accepted that the climate damage is a universal matter. However, the damage occurring in the developed world is disproportionately higher than occurring in the rich world. Well, we understand that this disproportionate harm and being done to this particular region clearly is an inequitable outcome, no doubt about that. And that is the reason why the climate treaty themselves very particular about the cost of adaptation that should be paid by the developed world. In fact, the 1992, the Framework Convention specifically indicated that developed world will pay for the costs of adaptation to be taken by the developing world, and that same language was transferred to the Paris Agreement. I think thinking those specific paragraph about the adaptation cost being paid by developed countries being a part of the treaty in 1992 was a remarkable thing, because a group of countries indicated that they were willing to foot the bill, something that other countries will do. Such a thing probably will not happen if those things are to be discussed these days. In fact, 1992 was a remarkable year. And at that time, the climate treaty was made, and at the same time, there was a desertification treaty was made, and then also there was a biodiversity treaty was made. Three treaties requiring global attentions were also formulated there. So it's a remarkable year. And one thing, the scientific evidence were not that much available to support that the agreement at the treaty level. Given that treaty treatment of adaptation, how specifically the treaty treat adaptation, and the UNFCCC has mostly a process-related obligation on the part of the signatory countries, mostly to formulate and implement and publish and update the adaptation plans. And that same spirit also flowed to the Paris Agreement and also the process agreement. And before about 10 years later, we had a so-called Cancun framework adaptation framework, reinforcing the process type agreement. But at the same time, that Cancun agreement showed one remarkable step, that is that the developing countries will produce national adaptation plans. And the national adaptation plans is to show that what particular needs the developing countries have. Now, the adaptation needs is a tricky part because you need to differentiate the effort that being done on normal times against your effort have to be done under the changing climate. That's a science in that area is not that perfect as you'd like to have. A lot of uncertainty there. And Paris Agreement created a global goal of adaptation, so GGA. When I first saw this agreement word, I thought this is a wrong name, misnomer. The proper name should be, I thought at that time, the Global South Goal on Adaptation, because adaptation is about the developing countries, Global South. But by using this global goal on adaptation, the world's effort on adaptation was really diluted. And so I believe it was a very critical mistake from the treaty side to advance the adaptation agenda. Well, as you know, not much action taken except the reaffirming the obligation of the countries to present plans and programs so that the world will know the countries are aware of the importance of the adaptation. Now, what is really happening around the world is this test score is on what's happening in the finance and implementation. And although the countries, developed countries, promised a lot of financial support for the developing country adaptation effort, as you all know, is far from less than the desired level of the level that developing countries need to properly adapt. Specifically, the adaptation investment, the annual adaptation investment is currently about $70 billion. It's a total it is about 5% of total climate finance. 95% of climate finance these days go to the mitigation. Why? The mitigation is a lot easier. Mitigation finance is a lot easier to prove a climate relevance of the investment relative to the adaptation investment, because adaptation investment is, again, has a very tough bar to show that it is a additional climate impact there. And annual adaptation investment in developing countries is $28 billion, much less than what happens in the adaptation investment in the developed countries, about half of what's happening in developed countries. So the adaptation investment in the developing world will have to increase a lot. How much? By an order of 10 times higher than the current adaptation investment. But that will not happen because we have a structural, systemic problem. That is that all those countries, particularly least developed countries, are burdened with high national debt, foreign debt. And how much of foreign debt? Well, I have some statistics here that the currently developing country foreign debt is $32 trillion, which means that the interest payment is about $1 trillion by developing countries. And 38% of the developing countries turned out to be paying about 10% of government revenue for this interest payment on foreign debt. It's much higher than the expenditure on education or health. Under those circumstances, it's just impossible for the those developing countries to consider investment in adaptation. There's also fiscal space for that. So I think to comply with the treaty requirement of helping developing countries with financial assistance, especially with the grant-based financial assistance, we need to approach this problem from the very root. In that sense, the Barbados last year's consummation of deal, which is the debt for the climate resilience swap, was a remarkable one. It is the change the existing high interest debt to another new loan with low interest rate, specifically proceeds of the loan targeted, directed for the sustainable investment. And then secondly, the savings in the interest rate create a space for government revenue, which can also be put to use for the sustainable development. And Barbados example is quite a successful example. And I hope those type of arrangement could be scaled up so that the structural, the systemic problems of facing the developing world's adaptation can be relieved. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee, for your initial remarks. And you have already touched upon very much important, financial constraint and your proposals. Then we could discuss definitely later. Now, let's listen to the next speaker. That is Mr. KUMAHIRA. So, Mr. KUMAHIRA, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm going to start the slide. Yeah. My name is Tomo, I'm co-founder CEO of Water One. I'd like to talk about adaptation from the lens of water and agriculture, and I talk a lot about on-the-ground adaptation. My background, I spent half of my career in rural Kenya planting trees with 30,000 farmers, and now I'm based in California working with farmers in one of the most depleted groundwater sub-basin. My background is private sector, social sector, and academia and research, and I would like to really focus on what I see from the ground, what it means to adapt. And following the Dr. Lee's explanations about adaptations, I see adaptation is about asking so what of climate change. And adaptation means adapting to some changes. So what are the changes? That's the exact question everyone must be asking when we're talking about this subject. And to symbolize it, I'd like to introduce this chart by our resources institution, Aqueduct. This projects the stress map, water stress map by 2030. You see lots of red across the globe, whether it's global south or global north. And I believe agriculture and water is the critical juncture in this issue because 70% of water is used in one sector, agriculture. And if you are familiar with developing nations, agriculture is the very sector where a vast majority of people living under the poverty line are supplied by. So this is the critical connecting dots for many of the adaptation challenges, especially with regard to global south. And we can always talk about system level thinking, but at the same time I value voices from the ground. So this is what I see on the road every single day when I'm working with farmers in California. Farmers need water. Your family needs food. And this is oftentimes how the discussion goes. And from the recipient, from beneficiary, or from farming community's perspective, it's a very different picture from what we see. If you are farming, you will see the following. First, precipitation rainfall, unpredictable, unreliable. Surface water, competed, industrialization, urbanization, AI, data center, you all know these keywords. Groundwater has been offering lots of buffer for people on the operational ground, but now it's mostly depleted. So if you are sitting farming, adaptation means responding to these changes. In an attempt to master this question of what if I were a farmer, how can I make changes? I did a related research at Stanford University to map out all the existing solutions. So if you want to nerd out about this issue, you can access the report from this QR code, and I will save everyone the time to talk through 150 solutions. But I can categorize this into 5 major topics. First one, it's about supply. Can we increase the supply? Desalination, recycling water, these are the technologies that are on the way. Distribution, can we move water from one place to another? Can we do storage to prepare for droughts? Can we change farmer behavior to do much more water-friendly farming? Or can we innovate in soil health and crop health? And as some of you are in the policy sector, we have a lot more to offer, from data optimization to inform these decisions and forcing parameters. That includes policies, financing, and other social norms. So the point I'd like to convey through this is that when you look at the supply-demand balance, this is a change. We need to look at the system at large, and we have lots to play, especially with connecting the dots. So I'll do the summary at the end. Adaptation is about asking, so what? What's the changes? And agricultural water, in my view, represents one of the biggest ones for the world to come. Farmers are oftentimes squeezed in between, so don't blame farmers and say, hey, you guys need to change. We have bigger system there. And supply-demand imbalance is oftentimes where we can start from. And I'd like to end this thought. Volatility is not only a threat and risk, volatility creates opportunities for innovation to come up. And I really hope that this discussion starts with that note. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. KUMAHIRA, for your very much valuable insights. Now, I'd like to invite Dr. Faten Attig-Bahar, Deputy Director of the Future Earth Africa Hub. Dr. Bahar, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, everyone. I'm very honored to be here today to contribute to this very important and crucial discussion on climate adaptation. Maybe I will share with you a different perspective as coming from an African continent and working a lot with African context, where all those effects of climate change and also extremes are affecting hardly the society, the vulnerable community, the economic and the socio-economic context and everything. According to the WMO report on the state of climate in Africa 2024, it was recorded that 2024 was the warmest or second warmest year, depending on the data sets. So the past decade has been really the warmest on the record. So sea surface around the continent reached high levels, particularly rapid warming around Atlantic oceans and the Mediterranean Sea. The average of the sea surface and also of the highest temperature levels around the surface reached 0.86 degrees above the average that we got in 1998, 2020 for the average of this period. So that means that this record is getting higher more and more, and also it is very important to really start thinking about how to foster actions around that. Drought, floods continue to hit the lives and livelihood of millions across Africa. So we saw through 2024 many in different countries. If we talk about what is happening, for example, in Kenya, in North, in East, in West, so different countries suffered from that. And this had real consequence on agriculture, environment, food, water, health, and education. And from the previous presentation, there were also some comments on that. The economic losses for these climate disasters for the first half of the year of 2024 was estimated to be 0.5 billion USD of damage. So this raises the critical questions and also the call for action on how can we foster actions for climate adaptation and what should be done. Working a lot in the context of international organizations and also society, working close to local communities, to early career scientists, and also the science community, I believe that there is very important that the science and innovation must really lead this decade of action. It is very important that we incorporate this emerging technology to enhance impact and cost effectiveness for these adaptation solutions, including all these sometimes easy ways that we can see sometimes accessible to some of the farmers, even in poor areas, for example, the mobile alerts or specific farming applications, remote sensing, easy technology that we can provide for them. Although now, for the current context, we are also limited by the limited digital literacy and infrastructure and access to data, but there were also some efforts and some examples coming from few countries that also started to think seriously about the importance of working on adaptation. And I would like to mention a few of those examples across few countries, such as the Climate Change Knowledge Portal and Digital Master Plan, and this is supported by the Kenyan government, UNDP, and the World Bank. And this is about including this mobile weather alerts, flood risk mapping for the communities. The Aligned National and Subnational Adaptation Plan, and this is supported by the government of Senegal with the support of UNDP and the Green Climate Fund. Second, which is very important, is the voice of the young researcher and scientists, and they should be on the forefront line contributing to the development of this new method, innovation, scientific approach that address the challenge of climate adaptation that we're facing now. I'm saying this because they have that ability to be closer to the community, and also they have the way on working closer to those technologies so they can master solutions, and they can also contribute to bring something to the table when talking about how should we tackle this. So there are many ways to engage with them, and this can be through capacity development, awareness raising, empowerment, policy making, and advocacy. I would like to mention a few of the examples that we did with the young scientists is to support the IPCC process review for the RR7. There's also another call to support the new IPCC report, and others, for example, what we do for capacity development, mainly they are targeting African continent, and this was called supported by the Future Earth Africa Hub to the Belmont Forum, and one of the main pillars was on disaster preparedness. And there were a lot of capacity development done to support scientists and African-led project for this call, and this is linked very much to adaptation. With this, I come to the end of my remarks. Thank you very much, and back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Bahar, for your very much valuable insights. Now, before we move to the panel discussion, I'd like to invite brief comments from our esteemed co-moderators, particularly Dr. Sergeudin. Could you offer your perspective, especially on the adaptation needs of the Global South, and the importance of innovation in finance?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to just point out three major points in my comments here. Number one is when we talk about the Global South, we are really looking at both the middle-income countries and the very poor countries. And their needs are different, and their capacities to cope with the challenges are different. And as such, it is not, very helpful to combine everything under the title of Global South. The second part is that I believe that if we look at the poorest part of the world, in fact, the dry lands cover 40% of the land surface, have 40% of the population, but have 70% of the poorest people. And they are indeed in agriculture, and therefore I'm very grateful for the presentation focusing on water and agriculture and food security. The third point associated with that is that it can be done to transform that, but we have a serious bottleneck, which is that if I give somebody today $1 billion and say, okay, go and do adaptation projects in very poor countries like Niger or whatever, you wouldn't know where to start. It's not just the absence of money, it's the absence of where you're going to invest these monies to have the maximum impact that you need for dealing with protecting lives and livelihoods in periods of erratic rainfall going from drought to flood and back again. And the last point I would make is that that can be dealt with by mobilizing, in fact, not only the international multilateral banks, the African Development Bank, the World Bank, and so on, but also mobilizing the UN agencies, so the FAO can work on agriculture, WHO can work on health, et cetera, and help these countries prepare the portfolio of projects that they need. My last point is that we need a real innovation, not so much in technology, but in finance. And this can be done, in fact, by saying we have very limited amounts of public funds. And all in all, the OECD total development assistance is about 200 billion a year, all sectors. And to say that we want to go from there to, even if that was all for climate change, from there tenfold to $2 trillion is never going to happen. I mean, the taxpayers in the North are not going to do that. But if, on the other hand, we use the small amounts of money that are available on public funds, both from the governments themselves and from the donors, we could use that to identify, prepare, and de-risk the projects. What do I mean by that? If you go to the private sector, they are in fact willing to lend to these countries who are already having a huge debt overhang, but they lend to them. Why? Well, it's sovereign debt. And you say to them, well, why don't you then invest in the project? They say, well, oh, I don't trust the government. Okay, we'll give you a multilateral investment guarantee. What? Well, you know, local currency, but okay, we'll give you a hedge fund currency. How? But these are complex projects. Okay, so we'll give you a project insurance. And we use limited amounts of funds for de-risking and then sell it. And to sell it, we need to, in the private sector, we need to mediate through a system where we assemble all these projects into portfolios, and then, as Wall Street would say, slice and dice them to make them more liquid, so that somebody who wants to invest 100,000 can, somebody wants to invest 10 million can, and by and large, we also accept that within that portfolio there will be a certain element, 10, 15 projects that the percent that would fail, but on average we could make that work. Why is that so important? Well, because although I just said that the public funds are 200 billion today, the private sector funds are now at $480 trillion. So if I want to get 2 trillion to 3 trillion out of 480 trillion, that looks much more feasible than trying to increase the amount of public funds being transferred by a tenfold. So we really have to rethink our approach in that. There's a lot more that can be said about that kind of innovation as well, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sergeldin, for very insightful perspective, including your innovative idea for finance. So now, Mr. Musa, could you please talk a little bit about the importance of international cooperation, and also knowledge sharing for adaptation, if I may?
Thank you very much. In the little time that I have, I'd like to talk about this from more of a local perspective. So, and particularly from an African context rather than a general global South context. On the African continent, South Africa, where I come from, is the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases as a result of the coal-fired power stations being the main source of electricity generation in the country. However, and if you take all of, I won't take all of the other countries, but take the countries neighboring to South Africa, Lesotho, Swaziland, Mozambique, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe. Those countries' emissions are minuscule. But even if you take South Africa itself, in the global context, South Africa's emissions are minuscule. They are tiny. You're talking about an installed coal capacity of about 35,000 megawatts. At any one point in time, the available capacity is between 25 and 30,000 megawatts. So it's really minuscule. So if you do a mental experiment, and if you shut down all of the coal-fired power stations in South Africa overnight, it will make no difference to the global warming trajectory at all. If you take into account the emissions coming from the rest of the world, it's not a big player in emissions at all. At the same time, we all know that the 1.5-degree target has more or less been missed. We know that the accumulation of greenhouse gases is going to continue, and the adverse effects of global warming will be felt by South Africa. And the important point is here, it will be felt by South Africa regardless of what it does. Whether it does mitigation or not, it will be felt by South Africa. It's even more so for the neighboring countries I've mentioned. Regardless of what they do to their energy profile, they're going to suffer this. So from a strategic point of view, and this is what I've argued in South Africa, I used to be the head of the Presidential Climate Change Commission. At my last meeting when I retired from that, I said that what South Africa should be doing strategically is focusing almost only on adaptation. Because adaptation is in the hands of the country. They can do something about it. They can do something about doing something about adverse effects of floods and sea level rises and those sorts of, maybe they can't pay for it, but it's in their hands. But we've got a lopsided emphasis, partly because the global community puts enormous pressure on African countries to think about renewable energy and mitigation and not to think about adaptation. And here I must say that we at ICEF are equally guilty, because we talk a lot about innovation, but very little about innovation in the field of adaptation. And I think that this is something that we need to talk about, because the innovation and the solutions are not easily going to be generated from the poorest of countries that can't afford to fund the R&D work. They don't have all of these fancy research institutions and such things. So that's the only point I was going to make. And I think that as much as the global community has got it wrong, our countries in Africa also has got it wrong. They should be spending 80% of their climate bandwidth thinking about adaptation and 20% thinking about mitigation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Musa. Now, let's move on to panel discussion. And I'd like to divide the panel discussion roughly on two parts. The first one is on technology, and second one is on adaptation, adaptation finance in particular. And then first, technology. So, Dr. Lee, could you please elaborate what are the most important technologies, adaptation technologies for addressing, say, agricultural sector and other sectors which are very much relevant for adaptation?
The agricultural sector is the most prominently indicated sector in the national adaptation plans, and also the adaptation communication made by member governments of the Paris Agreement. And agriculture is very sensitive to the extreme weather events. And the recent AI-based early warning system could be a very useful technology to help reduce the impact on agricultural sector. And those AI-based forecasting models now they are boasting of they can do nowcasting, which is about 6 hours. They can inform the extreme events 6 hours in advance. That will make a great difference to the agricultural sector, because most of the agricultural output very sensitive to the extreme events according to the sector. So I hope that this increased dispersion of the AI-based early warning systems will help fundamentally the problems of the agricultural sectors.
I see. Thank you very much, Dr. Lee. So the following up question is to Mr. KUMAHIRA. And, you already touched upon various technologies. And then there are many technology options, including predictive technologies and so forth. So what are the biggest barriers for deploying those technologies in particular poor countries? And do you have any solution based on your personal experience?
Thank you very much for the question. I think the predictive technology is something that everyone would ask the question of, okay, do you know this year is going to be a dry year, wet year? So that is the million-dollar technology in question for a lot of agricultural operators in the world, including smaller farmers. And I think the biggest challenge is the risk return is not necessarily always so clear for farmers who are basically betting entire life asset or maybe even borrowing money to plan this year's seasoning. And you can come in and say, hey, this technology would allow you to tell the weather with 85% accuracy. That means 15% of the time, I may lose everything. How can we explain that to the farmers or people on the ground who may have to take excess risks And there would be probably more solution to be made around how can we finance that, or can we help them mitigate these risks financially instead of just adapting to technologies. But overall, I think the AI and evolution of the new technology allow people to access more information faster, cheaper. And I see a lot of physical-based modeling that required a team of engineers and researchers turning into a few clicks with machine learning programs. So I generally see empowering trends in this.
I see. Okay, thank you very much. And Dr. Bahar, you touched upon the capacity building problems for, say, enhancing the utilization of those technologies. So what are the biggest challenges for intensifying or enhancing capacity of the, say, researchers, and how to empower young researchers, as you touched upon in your initial presentation?
Yeah, thank you very much. This is a very good question, because currently when we talk about the global South Africa, and so when we see the biggest proportion of the population are youth and young people, so then there is like a huge human capacity that can really lead the change and can contribute to that. But also this capacity is facing a lot of challenges, mainly when it comes to enabling them to the decision making, and also to foster their capacity and skills, to be able to drive some change, to make decisions on that. So capacity development at individual level and also at institutional level is very important, and this needs also to be to come together with institutions, with infrastructure, because there should be also some infrastructure to drive those capacity development. We try to drive many of those, and I saw a lot also of nice initiative coming from international organizations, from groups, from, for example, the UN in having these youth engagement strategies and supporting that and so on, to have them part of panels, leadership level, contribute to decisions, and also, but also at our level, how to drive capacity. So we need to kind of generate funds for that, work also together with universities, institutions, philanthropies. They also put some funds and some support to have those actions, mainly when it comes to adaptation. And we need also to have them part of what we do, because they have also that possibility to reach out to other category of communities. For example, we'd like to translate the science evidence, to the community, and also to train the community on how to do it. So the young generation can also play that interface role, in how to take those, because they come from the science, but also they can create that kind of bridge, and then we can see also the solution not only kind of translated of science level, but also can be implemented at local level. And I believe like this is something very important. I just want to mention one example of one of the peer colleagues, and that was, it was our time when we were doing a postdoc. His project was just to create a platform where he can communicate data about rain via SMS to farmers, and that was project, he was living in Benin, That was a small project, but it came with a lot of relevance to people there, because they were prepared kind of on where they received the rain and where they're expecting drought, So I believe like also this kind of initiative can also bring a lot, to the way that we are dealing with the issues and the problem. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Dr. Segeudin, you'd like to say something?
Yes, thank you. I would like to just get the microphone here. Yes, I would like to say something about technology. Let me just take you back more than 60 years. The world was expecting that India was going to starve. Even eminent environmentalists like Paul Ehrlich were talking about famine in 1975 and so on. And then the Green Revolution happened. But it didn't just happen. This was a scientific investment that was made in divine better types of plants. And the India that couldn't feed 450 million people at the time now has not only feeds 1,400 million people, but is a major exporter in all fields. We can triple the production on the same land and water. And that's very important because it can be done. It was done with difficulty at the time with the technology of the 1960s. Now we can do it much faster. We can design plants that are more drought resistant, more salt resistant, have a shorter growing season, deeper roots, have a higher yield, and more nutritious content in the plant. It can be done because now we know all the genetics, which we didn't know at the time, and we have the techniques to do that with genetic editing and other techniques. We need to refocus the international agricultural research system towards the needs of the poor people in these countries that are going to be most affected by climate change. And that will be one of the best adaptations we can give them because it's immediate. Next year, they have a better seed, they have a better harvest, and more resistant harvest. And it spreads very quickly, as we have seen in India. And India was not a pilot project. We're talking about a continent that has 450 to 500 million people, and it was done with the technology and communications and infrastructure of the 1960s. So today, we can reach throughout the drylands with the technology, infrastructure, and communication systems of the 21st century.
Dr. Segeodin, do you think that if adaptation risk intensify further from now, then that would be, say, encourage such another revolution for adaptation technologies?
Oh, yeah, well, it depends. I mean, we need, what worked very well in the past was a collection of international agricultural research centers working with the national agricultural researchers in all these countries. And that system was called the Consultative Group for International Agricultural Research, and it was supported by a number of donors. The amount of money is small, but the idea is once you have that, the new types of seeds that are needed, new types of plants that will be more resistant to the likely vagaries of the climate change, you will really help people very, very profoundly, especially those who are living really on the borderline. As I said, in the drylands, you know, you have 40% of the population, 70% of the poorest people, and they are susceptible to the vagaries of rainfall changing every year. And therefore, by getting the best brains working on agricultural research to focus on how to transform the seeds, if you want, of the next year into things that are more drought resistant, more salt resistant, have shorter growing season, have deeper roots, higher yields, and it can be done. It can be done. We showed that it can be done in the 60s. We can surely do it much better now in the 21st century.
Okay, thank you very much. And now let's move on to finance issues. And Dr. Lee, already you have touched upon an example of the debt for climate resilience. So do you think that this sort of financial arrangement could further increase for enhance the adaptation finance availability for all over the world?
Absolutely. And I think Ismail mentioned $1 billion, and I hope you can give me that money. And I can find a number of interesting adaptation projects for that. And in fact, in the previous session, we discussed the nuclear issues. And Korea featured one of the countries that very strong on the nuclear electricity sector. And the Korea began that nuclear powered industry when the country's income was $250 per capita. $250 per capita. So give me $1 billion, then I will find someone in the developing world to do the same for the adaptation investment. With regard to the financing, I think that the debt financing for the developing countries' adaptation should be debt. And de-risk absolutely needed. And I believe the one way of de-risking, for whatever projects we think is Barbados example. And the challenge to scale up that such a deal. And I think given enough time and also given the success story of Barbados deal, I rather wish to be on the optimistic side of it.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Musa, the Dr. Sergeudin already touched upon the possible financial arrangement, de-risking finance for adaptation. So coming from South Africa, what do you think about his proposal and also debt for the climate resilience approach?
Yeah, I think that the financing question is extremely complex. One of the reasons for that is because in the rich countries, politically, it's not easy to take political credit for financing adaptation. The politicians find it to be too nebulous a concept, whereas if they provide finance that in the end results in a solar PV farm which can be photographed, that sort of makes more sense. So there's a bit of a political problem with this thing. I think that the focus on water and agriculture probably, you need to in the end narrow the focus, because adaptation is a very broad subject matter. And food and water and agriculture probably is quite a good focus there, because in that, innovative financing mechanisms can be found. One of which can be found if you examine quite deeply, why does Europe export food to Southern Africa? And why does the United States export protein to Southern Africa? And the reason for that is not because they are more efficient or they've got more fertile land or anything of that sort. It's simply because of the way in which the financing has been structured and in which the subsidies and the support for farmers in the United States and Europe has been structured so that they are able to export to Africa. And when you do that, you're destroying the agricultural sector and you're destroying any hope for innovation when it comes to adaptation. So that's a topic I think that needs focusing on.
Dr. Segiodin.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just want to point out two other things which we haven't mentioned, which are very important. And this is carbon offsets and carbon markets. I think now we are beginning to realize that this becomes a feasible proposition, and whereby the projects that are in adaptation would also be eligible, not just the projects that are in mitigation would be eligible. But this is where, in fact, we can have institutions like the World Bank and like the international banks play an intermediation role where they will guarantee to someone that the amount of the projects in that portfolio of projects that I was mentioning before are indeed green projects. And I had experience of raising a lot of money when I was at the World Bank from the rich countries, because they were directly responsible for the governance of the financial institutions. Their finance ministers sit on the boards of the IMF and the World Bank and the Inter-American Bank and so on. And therefore, they can tell their taxpayers, yes, we have verified that these projects work and are useful and are helpful, and that therefore, if we allow them to be used for carbon offsets, that enables money to flow back from the private sector of their countries to the developing country governments, who themselves are already overburdened with debt. And yes, debt swaps would be needed as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, let's open the floor. So please raise your hand if you have questions, and please please introduce yourself and make it clear to whom you are addressing your questions. Anybody who'd like to ask a question? Crystal clear? Yes, please.
Oh, thank you very much. So in many parts of the world, sea level rise is also a very significant concern. And I was wondering if anyone could address the question of adaptation and for sea level rise.
Perhaps I think, yes, Sergeudin, Dr. Sergeudin, you'd like to say something?
Yes. Well, there's a major study before we get to whether entire cities will drown and will be below water. Even relatively small amounts of sea level rise have very devastating impact on the deltas. The deltas, specifically the four major deltas that are going to be most affected are the Mekong, the Nile, and in Nigeria. And there's one fourth one, which I right now miss. But even a ½ meter to a meter rise would displace 6 million people. and through saltwater intrusion. And it's already happening right now. And therefore, preparation to deal with the saltwater intrusion into prime agricultural land in the deltas is a very major type of adaptation project, both in terms of what you plant. So for example, planting rice, which has a lot of fresh water puddling that pushes down the weight on the salt water that is coming into near the roots, is one of the techniques that is being used, but it's not the best one or the only one. Pedology, soil science, and studying crop rotation and other techniques are all needed, and most immediately in the deltas where the fresh water comes and the salt water can come from even small levels of sea level rise.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions there. I just want to add a little bit of more positivity in Asia and the Pacific region. I happen to chair the Governing Council of Asia Pacific Water Forum. So water security, of course, linked to adaptation very, very closely. There are a couple of things I have not really heard through the panel discussion. One is about river basin-based solutions. So yes, food agriculture is in it, but if you look at what's happening in reality now, decision makers start to get more sophisticated in terms of addressing, of course, the financing part, not only just de-risking or blended finance, but also look at payment for ecosystem services there. So there are lots of innovative solutions on the ground level which have already been deployed. I think that's the part actually we need to look into there as well, rather than, we're talking about food, agriculture, but also there are other dimensions, water there, ecosystem there as well. The second dimension I do want to bring up actually, so ADB as the regional development bank actually for Asia Pacific region, back in May, they made a major announcement in Rome. So by 2030, they are planning to invest in sustainable food system transformation to $40 billion. The current level is $16 billion. That has become a major opportunity actually for, of course, overall in Asia Pacific regions there, together trying to figure out how to, of course, they will raise the money and how to use the money very effectively. I think that's an opportunity for many stakeholders in the region to participate in that process and trying to figure out how to, 10 times or 20 times, even 100 times to leverage actually more financing to drive the sustainable food system transformation in the region. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Anybody would like to comment on the first basin-based solution and also food system transformation? She exemplified such an event in Asian region, but such a good example could be replicated in African continent. Perhaps Mr. Musa, you'd like to say something?
The only thing I wanted to say really was that perhaps we should, out of this discussion, recommend to the steering committee of ICEF that at the next meeting, maybe at future meetings, but maybe at the next meeting, we should focus specifically in a more concrete and practical manner on the innovation and technologies that have already been developed and implemented at an early stage, and those that are still in the stages of development with some promise. I think that it's worth looking at that, and we could focus on water and agriculture technologies in particular. And I think that's a purpose that we could serve as an ICEF. Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, time is running up, so I'd like to summarize the discussion, already very much rich. But first, we reaffirmed that the climate change adaptation needs is very much high and urgent priority, in particular Global South, or more specifically in very much vulnerable and poor countries, in particular in the African continent. That is clear.
And second, many speakers highlighted a wide range of adaptation technologies, like predictive technologies and so on. But again, challenge was identified, in particular, capacity building and how to de-risk those technologies. Then finally, and most importantly, so financial gap is a very much persistent problems. And then today, there were good examples of debt for climate resilience swap, or the very much innovative, proposals for de-risking, money for adaptation. And then perhaps I think Innovation Coolers Forum is mainly focusing on technologies, but innovation also needs to occur in financial systems. Perhaps in the next year, you could discuss innovation finance for adaptation, which is very much the pressing need for globally. So with that, if there's no other things, I'd like to conclude this session. And please give a thunderous applause to all the good speakers and the co-moderators. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Professor Arima, Dr. Sergelton, Mr. Mosa, and all the speakers. So I would like to ask all the speakers and moderators to rise. All right, let's send them with a big round of applause. Thank you very much for the outstanding session.